can say about that. Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Hometown Connections, for giving me this opportunity to come and talk. And this is my first time at this annual event. It's been great. I got to meet a lot of good people yesterday, have a lot of wonderful conversations, and then learn a lot more about public power. So I just have 30 minutes to talk about this very big topic, DER, distributed energy resources, and something called the DSO model, the distribution system operator model that's being talked about and in the industry to increase the penetration of these DERs. So I'll kind of get started, and the idea would be for me to kind of set the stage for what's going to follow the tabletop discussions. And so I'll start with talking about giving you an overview of DERs. I'll start with the what instead of starting with the whys. What are DERs? I think that term's been there for a long time. I mean, I was doing connection impact assessments for what we call embedded generation 15 years ago. It was essentially DERs. But what does that term mean today? So we look at that. What are some of the drivers that are hopefully going to bring about this increase in DER penetration? So as I said, 15 years ago, when I was doing those connection impact assessments in Ontario, it was supposed to bring about this green revolution, and you'd see rooftop solar everywhere and what have you. And none of that panned out, obviously. And it's been 15 years since. In another 15 years, we'll be close to 2040 and all those net zero mandates. But, and I think we heard a lot of the drivers yesterday. So we'll try to summarize that, and hopefully, unlike fuel cells, DERs are not going to be 5 years away, but there's going to be more DERs. What role do DSOs play in increasing these DER penetration? So what is a DSO and how that might, what roles, what functionalities it might have? We'll look at some of that. What are the challenges, especially for public power in this high DER DSO future? And what are some of the opportunities? What is some of that motivation that will help us get through those challenges? Towards the end, leave you with some key questions for yourselves that we hopefully discuss at the tabletop, but also that you take away with you to discuss with your members, with your boards, and so on. And some steps that you might consider as you move in this journey. So let's get started. What are DERs? So first and foremost, they are distributed connected resources. So resources that are connected to the distribution grid, right? It doesn't matter the ownership, doesn't matter the location, in the sense it can be behind the utility meter, behind the utility's customer meter, right? Ownership could be owned by the utility, could be owned by the customer, can be owned by the third party, but they're distribution connected. And resources could be generation, and that's generally what comes to our mind when we think about DERs, solar rooftops again, but not just solar. It could be, again, a couple of windmills in a farm, CHP units, diesel-backed microgrids, right? Any generation unit that's distribution connected. Storage, most of the time it will be battery storage at the distribution level, right? But again, not just generation and storage, but also load, right? So demand side management, demand response, all of that falls under DERs, right? And that's, so demand response is something utilities have been doing for a long time. And this image here that you see comes right out of a primer on FERC 2222, which shows there's generation, there's storage, and there are things kind of on the demand side, including energy efficiency, right? So essentially what DERs are, they're going to move us from what is a very centralized energy system that we've all been used to a more decentralized system. And that's kind of the future we're looking at, right? So some drivers, and again, as I said, some of those we spoke about yesterday, presentation from STEM, we saw there's declining cost of DERs. We know there's been declining cost in solar panels, and that's been there for the last more than a decade. But there's now policy support. FERC Order 2222 is an example. It allows IESOs, or it mandates IESOs to allow DERs as little as 100 kilowatts and more to participate in wholesale markets, right? So there is that policy support. There are tax incentives. There are more net metering programs and so on that we're coming to see. There are technological advancements that we've seen. I mean, solar panel efficiencies have gone up. Power densities for batteries have gone up. We've seen better fire suppression systems. We spoke about The distribution grid over the past 2 decades have seen some investment to make them smarter. There are smart switches, there are AMIs, more data that you're capturing in a lot of cases. So there's that. There's obviously the load growth side of things. We spoke about that, the Bitcoin mining, the AIs, but also a push towards deeper electrification, sectors such as transportation, heating, and what have you, right? And then the sustainability mandates. This could be federal mandates, state mandates, or corporate mandates. You have customers, you have your Nestle, your Microsoft, they might have to meet net zero goals by a certain date, right? How do you help them do that, right? Or how do you attract those customers into your municipalities to come and set shop there? So now we come into this DSOs, and again, now that we've seen that, yes, we need DERs, we can solve some problems, how do we encourage the penetration? So on the left here is what we've been used to, this centralized system, one-way power flow, there's the bulk electrical system, you have the centralized big power generator selling power to the transmission system, it brings it to the distribution system, and the distribution network has mostly been passive, supplying one-way power to the end customer. The future we're moving towards with these DERs and with these consumers becoming prosumers and what have you, is on the left there, where you have a lot more active distribution system, right? So you have two-way power flows, you have consumers who can change their demand profiles, you have consumers who can sell power back into the grid. How do you manage that? You need an entity that can manage that, and that's where the DSO comes into play. Essentially, it's being modeled as a mini ISO, a real-time system operator for the distribution grid that is able to create a market at the distribution level and settle that market much in the same way the ISO does at the bulk level. That's at a very high level, the concept of what a DSO is. What are some of the tasks it might be able to do? So here, for example, the DSO at the centerpiece, just like an ISO, it takes in bids and offers from market participants as one input. It is tied in to, say, the physical network of the distribution grid through a SCADA or a GIS, right? So it can do the economic optimization as well as the technical optimization. So it's giving true value to the DER on the distribution grid. In the sense, if it can calculate the distribution locational marginal price, that's where the value of the DSO is. It corresponds with the bulk system, right? And then is able to create an optimum dispatch schedule for the DERs. And that's the role of this entity, the DSO entity that we're talking about. This is again what a DSO in practice might look like, again, kind of following what the model of the ISO is, right? It receives, this is just a sample, say it receives bids from its market participants. It runs its optimization based on some forecasted pricing at the DS. It sends price quantity pairs based on that optimization to the ISO. The ISOs have multiple DSOs as well as multiple other market participants that they receive those price quantity pairs from, run their optimization, and they create an optimized schedule for day ahead, right? They send that back to the DSO. The DSO uses this firm pricing from the ISO then to create the next day ahead schedule for its DERs that it's able to then dispatch, right? So this is one potential practice that a DSO can do. In terms of some of the operations, it can get involved all the way from planning to settlement. So the planning will be more active, if you would. You create power flow scenarios, do a more network-oriented cost-benefit analysis of where those DERs can be, and sign up those or issue those contracts with those DERs. And in the market operation stage, it does its forecasting, say for the next day ahead, the short-term forecasting, receives its bids and offers, does its optimizations, and creates the optimization schedule, right? And on the settlement side, it will validate the operations of those DERs against those market rules and against those contracts, and it can issue final payments. This, in essence, is some of the things that the DSOs can get involved in. Will the DSOs look like this from the very get-go? Not necessarily, right? This is kind of an S-curve that comes from the Department of Energy's report, the recent report, but this was a very similar S-curve was issued by Naruk in 2018. So what this talks about, that 5% value that you see there is the amount of DER penetration on a feeder based on the peak load of that feeder. So if you have a 10 megawatt feeder, about half a megawatt or less, you're kind of in that low level DER integration, right? And if you have like half a megawatt to 1.5, you're at that moderate high level where there's a potential for creating a market, right? And anything beyond that, that's when you start really encouraging DER aggregators, VPPs to come in and play in that market. Jonathan?
Sorry to interrupt. So is that also dependent upon geographic size? So in other words, if you have to expand too far to be able to get up to that amount of capacity that you got?
So this is at a feeder level.
Okay,
right?
all right.
So again, as I said, when, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You can ask.
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, when it starts off, the ISO might not be at the whole distribution grid, right? Like it could start at a feeder level, at a station level, depending on what the local constraints are and what issues you're trying to solve. That's where we can start off with. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
So in recent years, we've had some struggles with NERC and FERC doing jurisdictional creep down into distribution systems. And they have indicated to us, if we go to distribution markets, that creep will come right down into that level. Have you contemplated those kinds of issues and risk for utilities that maybe aren't FERC jurisdictional today,
Right.
but would have a whole new paradigm of regulatory oversight if they chose to do this?
There's definitely that. That's one of the challenges that you'll see is the regulatory challenge that's going to come. But having said that, again, with the FERC Order 2222, that's already starting to come in a sense, right? So while public power utilities might be not at this stage, but at some stage, FERC might come and say, hey, what are you doing to make your customers able to participate in, especially jurisdictions which have ISOs, for example, right? And California, I know the California PUC has a working group on the DSOs, and they're coming out with a report Q4 of this year. That's obviously at this stage, just mostly talking to IOUs, but there is that risk is there. Yes, I mean, obviously there are things like that will come up, because then what do you do in terms of resource adequacy? Can you tie these DERs to how we saw yesterday? I think Jonathan's presentation, as it is saying, how little you get in terms of your resource adequacy for solar and batteries and so on, right? But those risks will come. NERC might come down saying, what is your reliability? You might have to follow these standards. So there is obviously that risk and that burden that will come with the DSOs. And that's why the business case would have to be made. And I think that's where the joint action agencies, rather than maybe the distribution utilities themselves, potentially have the opportunity to help out and play that role, right? So that'll have to be studied. So, but yeah, in terms of the model, this is what it is. And then, having said that, there are some advantages why the DSO model is being considered. I mean, in this kind of high DER penetration future, you want a neutral facilitator, right? Someone who, like an unbiased intermediary that can have a consistent approach to DERs and managing these DERs. Why in certain cases can't the ISO play that role? Well, the ISOs don't have the visibility at the distribution grid level. They don't have the distribution grid modeled out, which the distribution utilities do. They don't understand the local constraints as well. The local players, the most informed stakeholder, which is the distribution utility and their joint action agencies, can make the optimum grid investments, right? Because they understand where they need to make investments, what are the constraints, whereas somebody at the state level, at the ISO level, might not be able to value those GDRs appropriately. You need a customer-centric approach, because for any market to be successful, you need the market participants to sign in, right? And for market participants to sign in, you need to know what your customers are looking for. So that's critical as well. And again, that's very reason why. Oh, Again, I think public power and joint action agencies can play a good role, right? It gives grid flexibility, options to distribution grids, again, allowing us to solve a lot of the problems that we've been talking about, kind of at the distribution level, right? Maximizes value because any savings of optimizing these assets at the distribution level can be passed on to the customers. You're creating revenue opportunities for DERs, because that's been the other thing, right? Even while the cost of DERs has gone down, why don't you have more and more developers coming in? Because there is really maybe potentially no incentive to do it. A Target or a Walmart has a lot of roof space. Can they put solar panels on there? Yes. Why aren't they putting it? Because there's no real incentive for them to do it, right? Can we create incentives for players who want to participate to come and play? That's really the key. Challenges, regulations and market barriers, probably the top one. Again, as Randy was saying, there's potential for more regulation to come in. Depending on where you are right now, is the regulation even favoring DER growth, potential for DSOs? Those are things that you have to really understand. Market models, what if you're in a state with no ISOs? Is there access to any markets? Can you create those markets? Can you create that value? And how would you compensate these DERs for those, right? Even if you walk down this journey, there is infrastructure upgrades you would need, right? So there is the economic challenges you have to, as we saw kind of on that curve, even at that low DER penetration, that's where you have some grid modernization projects. You'll have to get involved with that if you haven't already come across that path. So certain utilities might be primed for it, but certain utilities might still have to make that journey, right? So there is that. There are the technical challenges, right? There is obviously the voltage and short circuit constraints on feeders, DERs, especially renewable one, bring intermittency to your distribution grid. How do you manage that? Are your systems modeled properly right now? While you might have certain capabilities, but you need really good feeder models. To what level are those models available? Stakeholder engagement. I mean, again, you need to see whether your customers are interested in participating, what kind of markets do they want to participate in, solar, battery, what assets do they already have? That might be kind of the low-hanging fruit, demand response programs, and so on. What about your shareholders? How do you convince them that this is the right path to go? Do you want to encourage DER participation? How do you translate this complex concept down to the shareholder level, right? That's critical as well. And organizational change. I mean, we already spoke about workforce challenges with kind of day to day, and now you're adding further complexity to your structure as it is. And overall, I mean, distribution utilities have been great at doing infrastructure, poles and wires. This is a whole new layer on top of that. You're introducing markets. You're not just thinking about peak load, you're thinking of optimization, you're thinking more in terms of energy. And how do you, again, kind of hire the talent, train that talent, and most importantly, kind of retain that talent? Yes, John.
So a public power entity is looking at this role. Does that mean that in order to preserve the independence of the role, they have to shed any ownership of the DER resources themselves so that they are a truly independent entity?
And so that's that next question, right? What entity really takes on the role of the DSO? Is it the distribution utility itself? And then obviously there comes in the conflict of interest because they cannot own assets in the market that they're operating. So can the joint action agencies then do it if they don't have direct ownership of those DERs, right? So that's obviously the market rules, again, based on the jurisdiction that you're operating in, you'd have to come up. But yeah, it's a good point. So some of the challenges, what are some of the opportunities? Again, what's our motivation to kind of overcome those and even talk about this? Community alignment, I think this is really key. I think key accounts and more like C&I customers, they have net zero mandates. Residential customers, they want green options and cost-effective paths to electrification. I mean, as we're talking about this deeper electrification, a lot of work in terms of infrastructure will have to be done irrespective at the distribution grid level. Who ends up paying for that, right? At the end of the day, it's a ratepayer. Can we optimize the grid rather than creating a grid that just serves the peak, right? That's the question. And DERs give us that opportunity, and the DSO model gives us that option of creating an optimized grid. There's potential business growth. So in terms of municipalities want to obviously attract businesses, they want to increase revenue, they want to meet their own sustainability goals. A lot of cities, a lot of municipalities have certain sustainability goals that they want to meet, and DERs give them that option. Right? So again, because you're increasing, you're bringing in revenue in terms of increasing development of DERs and so on, that's a win-win-win for everybody. New business models for entities that want to take on the role of the DSO to consider, right? As a market operator, you essentially what's your business model? Just like an ISO, you basically take transaction on any transactions that happen, and that opens up a new revenue model for entities that again take on this role, offering this as a service. So DSO as a service to utilities that might not be ready or might not be wanting to take on this role. And again, that option. Creating an optimized and sustainable grid. Again, we talked about this better asset utilization with this DSO model, with these DER assets, right? You can have a more diverse portfolio. You lessen your dependence on fossil fuel and increase grid reliability and resilience. I think this was another play that we talked about with microgrids and so on. Reliability and resilience, especially with the weather events that are happening, these local generation sources open that option for you, right? So you can value them now better, again, locally using a DSO model with these DERs, because you know your local reliability and resiliency opportunities that exist. And taking an innovation and leadership kind of role, right? So you get to move towards a more intelligent grid. You have new business opportunities that you really get to explore. Kind of for the first time, I think, in a while, there is the option of creating a different business model for the utilities. And really to take a leadership position, right? Set the standards, have the conversations with the regulators, have the conversations with the stakeholders up front. So you're really being in the driver's seat rather than somebody coming and telling you that you need to do this, right? So what are some strategic considerations? Again, some questions that I want to leave you with that hopefully we can have a discussion on, kind of on the regulatory and policy framework. Are you already operating in an ISO market? What is the take of your governing bodies on hardware solutions or on DERs, right? Are those being talked about? Do you value them a certain way? What are state and federal level policies for net zero and decarbonization? Are your members ready for DER penetration? Have they considered it? Do they have the models ready for that? What is the demographic of customers? Are they looking for electrifications? Is there high growth EV penetration in your areas? Is there a lot of solar in your area? Start thinking about those questions, right? DSOs, why would you want to take on that role? Start thinking about that. Maybe what is the human capital investments that you might have to make? What is the timeline of achieving that goal? Do you want to get there in the next 3 years? Do you want to get there in the next 10 years, maybe, right? And what does that path look like? And define kind of your ecosystem. Who are the key stakeholders in that for you? Is it your customers? Is it your members? Your shareholders? Who are the different vendors that play in this area? Who are the market participants that you might have to attract? Your key accounts and so on. And some just thoughts for next steps. I mean, again, some of you might have already done this, some of you might be in different areas, but yeah, conduct a DER readiness assessment, look at that landscape, look at your load generation and DER forecasts for your service territory, technology assessment. I mean, all of this would need potentially a new set of technology that allows for more active power flows and transactions to be managed and so on. What technologies do you have? How does this new technology tie into that? So kind of have that DER readiness assessment, develop a DSO transition roadmap. I mean, build a business case for it. Is there value for you or your members to kind of walk down this path? Start engaging with your stakeholders, assess what internal capabilities you might already have. And some of you that might be willing, I mean, there is the potential to do pilot projects with a lot of funding in this area available, right? So that's obviously something that can be talked about in terms of getting some hands-on experience